out again.
Maybe
You cut out again.
what's going on with that humble servant guy? Why did he?
You're good. You're good.
Okay. So
Keep going.
just in case the audience is thinking right now, hey, what's going on with humble servant? I thought this guy was Protestant. Like, what? Why did he even mention the word works? Why did he even mention anything? Who shall believe in him should not perish. There's no and. It's just it is as it says, believes. So it is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And I've actually noticed that as many people who say it's by faith alone. What don't you understand? Faith only, faith alone. It actually starts out, it says by grace through faith. Now that's really perhaps pedantic, but that's actually technically how the Ephesians starts out with it. It says by grace through faith. So if you want to get real technical about it, I really like how Rebecca explained that. Hi,
Thank
CJ.
you. I liked your speech as well.
Praise God for that.
So here's a question. I like discerner's questions. Will God do one single thing that in any way does not match your current feelings of justice? My answer would be, I presume that to be the case. I don't think I know. I certainly don't have any confidence that I know exactly how God will do it. I know that there's principles that I think are kind of obvious, like God is fair in the sense of how he distributes justice. We can look at the Torah. I think it's a reflection of his justice. It says that his commandments are justice and righteousness, are the foundation of his throne. He cut the 10 commandments out of the blue sapphire stone that came down on Mount Sinai that his throne was sitting on, made out of blue sapphire. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's like the foundation of God's throne is justice and righteousness, and it says that the nations are judged by the law, right? The law of liberty. We're judged by the law of liberty or whatever. So in James, CJ can probably help me out with that. But in other words, I think God is love, and that's a reflection of the principles that he operates under. And I think we're made to understand that, at least on some level. So, but no, I would never think that I can judge whether or not, oh, God would never do that. He would do this. I think he would never torture people forever. And I have never heard a good argument for that making any sense. But no, I certainly don't know. Yeah. Like I said, about justice, about, what's appropriate punishment for the wicked. I don't know. Except for death.
Yeah. There's a few more things actually I think I still got on my mind that I would like to respond regarding how do you pronounce his name again, Rebecca? How do you pronounce his name again?
Afshin.
Afshin? Yeah, Afshin. There's some things, but I would like to, I think maybe CJ might have something to say.
Well, I'd like to take a real quick crack at this question. It's kind of a weird question, because in a way the answer has to be no. Otherwise it wouldn't be my current conception of justice. You know what I mean? It's almost like if it's my conception of justice and I think of God as just, then of course I'm going to say the answer is no. Because otherwise I would have a different view of what justice is. But I suspect that there's probably stuff that everybody believes in the here and now that will turn out to be either too harsh or maybe not harsh enough, even in some cases. But I also think that when presented with whatever that thing is, everybody is going to kind of have this almost innate understanding of, of the fact that God is a just being. One of the perfect examples I've always found of this is when you talk with atheists about the harshness of the Mosaic Code or the conquest of Canaan or anything like that. If you're not like in a debate setting where people are kind of expected to hold their own, I've always found that people kind of crumble almost instantly because it just becomes so obvious. It's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess if those people were terrible, then maybe it was permissible to have stonings or stuff like that. You know what I mean? And it's almost not even a mind thing. It's like something you just feel innately. Like we feel like evil deserves to be punished and good deserves to be rewarded. And we all generally understand what evil is, even if sometimes the details get fudged. So yeah, that's kind of the answer I would have to that question. I hope that was clear enough, Discerner. Also, shaloms to everybody. Appreciate you inviting me, Jamie.
Shabbat shalom.
Hi,
Nice to
CJ.
have you.
Good to hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Discerner is probably saying, well, I don't know, Discerner, do you believe in eternal conscious torment? I can't remember. I thought maybe you didn't. No, that doesn't matter. I mean, if you don't, it's not like wouldn't appreciate you or whatever, but I can't remember. Seems like I recall you saying that maybe you don't believe in eternal conscious torment, but I can't recall. The way you asked the question kind of makes me think maybe that you do. I don't know exactly, as if you can't admit I don't know exactly. I think I did, didn't I?
Well, and I will say too, I don't believe ECT either, but if
You're a
God
Calvinist,
really
right?
is the source of morality, then whatever he says goes, right? And this is actually one of the reasons why whenever I debate with Muslims, or when I hear people debate with Muslims, they'll always bring up the whole Muhammad marrying Aisha thing, and I get it because it's horrifying. But you kind of have to work your way there. You know what I mean? Because if Allah really is God, then it's like, okay, well, you have a problem with that, but God doesn't, and He kind of makes the rules. So like buck up, Buttercup. You know what I mean? So it's like when you just right out the gate, well, Muhammad was a pedophile. It's like, okay, but if Muhammad has God's go ahead, then he could be a cat torturer, and it wouldn't matter. Actually, I think pedophile is probably worse than cat torturer.
Well, that's like
point.
That's very like divine command theory sort of thing. I tend to like not like that. I'll admit, like I think God has to make sense, and you know what I mean? But I hear what you're saying. I do ultimately agree. Like if God says that, I would submit to it, I suppose. But I can't. I guess I have to be honest. The fact that my understanding of God from Scripture is, it's not that. I don't think God's that way per se, right? Necessarily. Although like those examples you gave are sometimes hard to like imagine. I guess like slaughtering a whole people, like all the people or whatever, and all that stuff.
I have a response for that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
No, you go ahead. You go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, finish what you're saying, CJ.
Well, and I just say I completely agree with that. I think that God's nature is revealed in Scripture is very kind and loving and patient, and so on and so forth. But I do think there is some truth to the statement of like, if you're saying He's the source of morality, then if the source was all the stuff you don't like, you would kind of have to bite the bullet and say, all right, well, I guess my morals are jacked up. Now, it just so happens that in the case of Christ, you don't really have to do that. With the exception of a few things, like if we were ever convinced that ECT was true, then I guess that would be an example. But I don't know. It is. I do think that's something everybody should wrestle with a little bit. It's just this idea of like, because let me real quick just tell you where I got this thought. It actually didn't start with Muslims. It started with Abraham and the whole sacrifice your son thing. And we know, because we have a complete Bible, that child sacrifice is something that God absolutely abhors. And Abraham probably had a good idea of that, but I don't know if he knew it as strongly as we do necessarily, just because he doesn't have a Mosaic law. He doesn't have everything that comes with Jesus and that kind of stuff, right? And like, so God just commanded him to do this like kind of terrible thing. And it's not like he could have said no. Right? I mean, like he had the power to say no. He could have like denied him. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is like it's not like he would have been holy if he did. Now, obviously, we all know how it ends, and Isaac isn't actually sacrificed because God doesn't actually want child sacrifice. But like in the moment, there's like this kind of catch-22 you have of like, well, the big guy upstairs said so, and I'm just some guy. So who am I to tell him that whatever it is that he's commanding is wrong? You know what I mean? And of course, Abraham didn't, and he's rewarded for that by being the father of Israel. And I don't know. I think that's just like it's an interesting thought to me. I didn't mean to derail, but that is a very interesting thought to me.
Yeah,
Rebecca?
that's perfect. That's perfect, because that's really, isn't it what God is looking for and what God was looking for from the beginning, with Adam and Eve? He basically asked them to trust him, right? Um, he told them what would happen if they ate from the tree. And what was in question there was whether or not God was trustworthy in what he said. When Satan tempted Eve, like, did God really say? Or, I mean, there was, or will you really die, or whatever. I'm totally misquoting this, but basically, like, this is really what it's about. When we face life circumstances and different things, and even things God tells us, will we choose to trust him or not? And sometimes it may appear that, it's, scary, or maybe it appears God isn't trustworthy, but God is asking us to trust him. And I think that's what was big about what Abraham did and what Mary did, because Mary trusted God, with what she would face as, being pregnant with no husband. So people are being asked to trust God in some pretty scary circumstances. And really, all of us are, because we all face circumstances in life that are scary. We all see the news. We all see all the bad things that are happening. And God is asking us to trust him. And I think that's like kind of the issue of life, right? Are you going to trust the creator to be just and good? And I just have always figured, if he's not just and good, we are all screwed. He is the best one to trust. Like, if there's any being to trust, it's the one who created us. So even if something looks to me like it's not just, I'm going to trust in God, because, it's just, where else would you go?
That I love it. That's beautiful, because
Mhm.
that is it. That is the issue. It's a faith issue. It always was. Go ahead, Humble. You were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Rebecca. That's excellent. I think there is a great response actually to the whole, like CJ brought up about how atheists or agnostic or whoever believers will say, well, what about all the genocide in the Bible, as quote unquote as they'll characterize it and such. And so I think there's a proper response to that, but maybe that's for another video that maybe in the future we could all do on whatnot. The old as people would say, what about the atrocities in the Old Testament? I think it's phrased sometimes.
I think it's on topic. It's on topic, because we're talking about the justice. We're talking about hell is about the justice of God.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to, I mean, we have to. But
no, absolutely.
I like to hear different ways people make sense of the, seemingly, people will often, even groups, like Marcion or whatever, rejected the God of the Old Testament, right? For that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to look to Jesus. If I'm ever wondering if I can't make sense of something, ultimately am gonna fall. I'll readily admit it. Like, I think the character and the person of God is perfectly exegeted by Jesus coming in the flesh. And so I tend to just fall back on that, and the idea that I trust God's judgment. If he thought he had to wipe people out, then that was the greater the necessity. It's not hard for me in that sense. I mean, although, just like the problem of evil mentally, I mean, or what's the word, philosophically, can be dealt with, but when you're suffering, it's not so easy.
And it just truly proves, like, in that utter destruction of such, that just proves that the wages of sin is death. So okay, if Jamie's going to give me the leeway to do this, I'll take a whack at it. I'm not saying that this is going to be perfect. Of course it's not going to be. Like, I don't really think there is a perfect response or that everybody's going to be satisfied with, but I'll take a shot at this. So I think in my mind is regarding. So let's take and put it into modern perspective. Now, a rhetorical question, maybe perhaps. Would it be wrong for the world government, say, if the Nazi regime or party arose in our modern times, and people started Nazism once again and wanted to not only start, slaughtering Jewish people, but not only that, they wanted to go to different sects of they wanted to slaughter, all the people in Africa, and then they wanted to slaughter every other that they didn't agree. They wanted to slaughter Canadians, and they wanted to slaughter Americans and Mexican people. And you go down the nations and go down the different types of people groups that we have in this world, and so on and so on. And they start killing off the world's population. At that point, now, would it be wrong for the world governments to get together and say, we have to do something about this Nazi group because they're killing so far they've gone through like an eighth of our population. We have no choice, but we have to take them out now. Now, my intuition is that I think most people would probably be like, yeah, what I would expect if the government. We would probably be infuriated. The government laid back and said, oh my goodness, they have a perspective and we just got to let them play out their course. I mean, they're just doing what they think, right? And, to them, this is loving. And to them, they got to do what they got to do. And they have a philosophy and we shouldn't disrespect that. That's political correctness. No, we would demand that the government says, you have to take care of this problem. They're going to reach us soon. We have to have armed forces. We got to get the military in this, what have you. And sure enough, I think that the government, because they probably realized that it would dip into them pretty soon, they'd probably be getting slaughtered off. So the government has to take this group out essentially because they are destructive to everybody else. They're murdering people, and they're destructive to themselves. It's a horrid thing. They're destroying the earth and people. Now, we have, say, a modern, and even if you want to go back to the 1940s or, when the Nazi party was more so going on, take the same analogy, even at that time, I mean, it was atrocious. It was an atrocity, abhorrent, what Hitler, the Führer, directed. Now we take that in a modern sense, and we would be demanding with hands and fists, pounding on the table, take them out, take them out, take them out. What is wrong with you, world leaders? You get them now, or we're going to do it ourselves, kind of thing, right? So it's interesting because I think atheists would be screaming, take these guys out. They're going to murder us all. This is going to be an onslaught. Oh my goodness, decimation is happening. And it's interesting that the atheist voice would be projecting of, decimate them, take them out. We got to defend ourselves. And they'd be like, and maybe people will be calling out, God, why aren't you doing anything? Where are you? Come on, send fire down like you did in the Old Testament. Send fire down, take these guys out. My children are going to die. My wife's going to die. I'm going to die. I can't, go on and on and on. But it's interesting that those same people, they look at the Old Testament, and when God did something about the ancient Nazis, they get angry. That's my point, essentially. Does that make sense? I'll explain further.
Very good. And you could even give ISIS as an example, too. I don't see anyone crying tears over ISIS being brutally bombed, right?
Yeah, exactly. Even like maybe a little bit what's going on, and dare I say it, in Russia right now. There's, but that's besides the point. So
yeah, but what about the babies?
Babies.
Well, I mean, in the Old Testament, they slaughtered babies.
Yeah. So I'm gonna first off. So there is dispute over that. Obviously, we have. Now I don't know where you guys would stand on this. So there is obviously dispute over that between, oh goodness, what's these Clay Jones, who I think would take the side that no, it did happen, but he has an explanation of how that goes. And then what's the other guy's name? He made the book Is God a Moral Monster?
Paul Copan.
Thank you.
What's
Paul
the other
Copan
one? There's another one too, CJ, that didn't you debate him?
Yeah, Randall Rouser. I did debate Randall. Randall's got a completely different view though. Copan says it's all like exaggerated and stuff.
Yeah.
Rouser says that it's basically just a crock. So his view, it's a super bizarre view, but to be most charitable to it, he basically says, number one, that our moral intuitions can tell us that certain stories aren't something God would have actually ordered. And that number two, God allowed those books to be in the Bible anyway, not because they give us any sort of historical truth or anything like that, but because there is some sort of like parabolic narrative for us to follow.
Yeah, didn't you interview him too? I can't remember now.
Oh no, I haven't interviewed him. But I did read his book, and I will say this: it messed with my mind a bit, but I can't come to his conclusion. But he does actually believe, I think, that these were historical events. I think he believes that they are
Hyperbole
no,
or something.
purpose, like intentionally mistaken views of God. Okay, like basically like the people thought that God was telling them to do this, but God really wasn't telling them to do this. But God wanted that mistake in the Bible.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Yeah, it's really.
I must have got distracted. Just quickly about Randall. Are we talking about Randall Rouser right now?
Yeah. The Jesus
Randall
Loves the
Rouser. Okay,
Canaanite
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Jesus Loves the
Right,
Canaanite. Right. That's so interesting. I don't agree with him, but I think I've heard a few. What were you saying, CJ? Sorry to interrupt you, man. Keep going. What you're saying on what you were talking about.
So that was actually Rebecca explained it perfectly, and to give because I think it's not true at all, but to be most charitable to Randall, you could compare it to like the Psalm. I can't remember the exact number, but where the psalmist is talking about Israelites going into the city and dashing their babies up against the corners and stuff like that. And what the Psalm really is a Israelite who's been, his civilization has been completely ransacked by these guys, and he's calling out to God for vengeance against the evil ones. But it's not like literally this sort of, what would you say, this endorsement of dashing babies against corners, right? And in that particular instance, I think Randall Rouser would even have somewhat of a point, because I do think that psalm is not meant to reflect.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I don't think it's God saying to do that. It's saying this is what's going to happen because of the one about the babies dashed against the rocks. That was just like a prophecy that this is what's going to occur, right?
Well, that particular one in the Psalm, it wasn't a prophecy. It was something like, "Blessed is the one who like sees the infants dashed against the rocks."
Yeah, exactly. And what it really is it's like this, and you have to kind of put yourself in his shoes, because here we are in America on our smartphones and stuff like that, and it's hard to understand what this guy's going through. But you can imagine, and I won't paint too violent of a picture, but violent enough for you to get it. The Russians show up in your little Idaho town, and all of a sudden you got dismembered children and raped women, and your home is burned to the ground, and everybody you loved is either dead or enslaved or something like that. And he's, suffice it to say, kind of angry, and I get that. And I think the psalm is really meant to kind of demonstrate that anger and that longing for justice for those who have been so ravaged. But the way he describes it is particularly brutal. You know what I mean? It's basically like, you did all this to me, so let it be done to you, and blessed is the person who does it. And Rouser's whole point is basically, it's like, okay, so much like that, the rest of these are things which originate from human authors, but God is nevertheless trying to communicate something through them. My problem with that personally, and everybody can speak for themselves here, but is the genre of Joshua and Judges and Samuel is Chronicle, which is not just a historical record, but a historical record in chronological order. It's like the most historical record kind of historical record. In other words, it's like of all of the scientifically historical kind of texts, Joshua is amongst the most scientifically historical, right up there with like the Gospels and stuff like that. And in other words, it just seems to me like there's not the kind of story being told here is not poetry. It's not Psalms. It's not anything like that. It's saying this is actually what happened. And Joshua is saying he literally spoke to God. It's not like, oh, I had like this super vague and ambiguous vision. It's like, no, the angel of the Lord actually like comes down and has a conversation with me.
And it's recorded that way. It's just recorded like a chronicles, like a what do you call it? You said it. I'm curious how Rebecca deals with this, being that she's such a liberal. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you. She's not a liberal.
No, she's
Everybody
not.
wants to make me a progressive.
Okay. I know, a progressive. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay. Well, this is something I have wrestled with quite a bit. Like, it's something that I've, it's those passages are not easy for me, but I feel that I have come to peace with them. I've read all these books, I've read Greg Boyd's book on this. I haven't read Paul Copan, but I've heard him talk about it. I've heard all the perspectives, right? And the one I still believe God ordered it. I still believe God is just. And the way that I kind of think about it is that I think the problem with us understanding it is that in modern times, we have begun too much to think of life as a right, like that that humans have the right to live. And I'm talking about from God, like, of course, humans there. I believe in human rights as far as like between humans. I don't think humans should have the right to just, kill babies and such. Okay. But I'm talking about like, what rights do we have with God? Somehow we think that we have the right to live 70 years, or that even a child has the right to live. Nobody has the right to live if God doesn't give them that life, right? And if God chooses to take away a life, he can take it away anytime.
Wait, are you a fundamentalist?
Maybe on this. So, at the beginning of Genesis, we see that God is actually lenient, and he doesn't, kill Cain. And he doesn't let Cain even be killed by other people. Like, he doesn't allow Cain to be Abel's blood to be avenged, right? And God actually like helps him. And then what happens? Then Lamech is like, yeah, well, if Cain didn't get it, basically like people got out of control. And then by the time you get to the time of Noah, the whole earth is filled with violence. So what I'm saying is, God tried to be lenient and not kill people when they killed other people, but it didn't work out because the entire world got filled with violence.
Oh, that's a great point. Oh man, I was just teasing. That's good. I agree with you.
And then, and then we have a key thing, during the time of Noah after the flood. Then God says this: if a man sheds a man's blood by man, his blood will be shed. So this is a new rule that God has put in place. No longer is he going to protect people from the vengeance and things like he did with Cain, because the earth got filled with violence. Now, the new rule that God establishes is, if you shed blood, that basically it's going to be, by blood. I mean, your blood will be shed by man. And so this is the principle that is in place. And this is something that, is in place from then when God kills the Canaanite, when God says for the Canaanites to be killed, guess what? God even waited a long time, because when Abraham passes through there, God's like, nope, we can't kill them yet because their sins aren't quite filled up yet. But he waited. And so they had hundreds of years to repent. So but they ended up getting the vengeance that God already promised was he already said it was going to happen. So anyway, that's the way that I think about it.
He waited until their iniquity filled up, or whatever it says.
Yes. But God had already established the principle that if you shed a person's blood, then by a person, you're going to have your blood shed. So the people living at that time, God waited until their sin had been filled up. And then even with the killing of children, okay, well, guess what? Children, they're part of the, they're part of the people. What I mean is, like, if you kill all the adults and then you leave the babies, well, guess what? There's nobody to take care of the babies. All right. So, when you're wiping out a people group, yes, babies will die. Well, guess what? If those babies deserve to be in God's kingdom, then he'll bring them into God's kingdom. So, God can bring them back to life. So, it's just, that's how I see it.
I think that is the best answer. Like, so that's another thing I just want to add really quick onto that. I would say, just like in the flood, they were warned, right? And so parents are responsible for their children. So the parents didn't heed the warning. So the blood of the children is on the parents' hands. I think you can make a case for that. Go ahead, Humble.
Yeah, that's excellent, Rebecca. That's excellent, Jamie. God bless you too. I would say, like, as the analogy of, like, for instance, Rebecca brought up about ISIS. So, like, if ISIS terrorists abducted or took over an airplane, and it had about, let's say, 250 people on it, and that just happens to have toddlers and whatnot. And I don't want to get too into detail because that get pretty gruesome, but children and whatnot, women, old and young, all the way to youngest to the oldest. But that same plane, they are going to go and crash that into New York with bombs that will take out a good portion of New York, will take out perhaps, let's say, the radius of 1 million people or more. Well, there is a situation here that, yes, perhaps it would be better that, unfortunately, 250 people may have to die, but to save the lives of over 1 million, so they have to shoot that plane down in the air. That's just a fact.
And I also think too,
Yes.
and I might be somewhat alone in this, but maybe not. I think that we too often, because we hear it in our political debates all the time, right? People talking about, like, what's the best way to, like, rehabilitate prisoners and stuff like that. And I'm not saying I'm against, like, second chances or anything like that, but I think we kind of forget in the modern world that like, punishment is in and of itself a virtue. Like, even if it doesn't accomplish any sort of, like, I give an example. People say, well, studies show that the death penalty doesn't reduce crime. And regardless of what your views on the death penalty are, or even regardless of whether or not those studies are correct, there's evidence to show that may not be the case. That's not really the point, right? Like, the point isn't to prevent future murder. It's to punish you for past murder. You're losing your life because you killed somebody. It's the idea of scaring the population into submission is fourth or fifth on the list for those guys who are arguing for the death penalty. The purpose of the death penalty is to punish you because you've committed a heinous crime. And that's just the end of the conversation. There's nothing further. And so while it is true, you prevent more damage being done by getting rid of the Canaanites now. And it is true that other people see that and maybe want to, to mend their ways so they don't end up like that. And it's even true that some of them, like Rahab, for example, took it as an opportunity to repent and were rehabilitated. All that's fine and dandy, but in the end, none of it's the point. The point is that the Canaanites, they did one too many terrible things one too many times. And God decided, in his infinite wisdom, that punishment was the necessary, what would you say, a response to that. And that really is just kind of the end of it. And I, for one, think that needs to be something that's regained in society, not to such an extent. Obviously, we're not gods. We don't have that kind of authority. But just this idea that, like, punishment doesn't have to have an ulterior motive. It can be simply punishment. And that in and of itself is virtuous because evil deserves to be punished.
Yeah, absolutely. No, amen to that, CJ, and God bless you, sir.
Yeah.
You know, the children, as far as with children, the babies and stuff, they were already going to face actually a far more severe, they were going to face a really bad fate with the Canaanites, because if people are not remembering in the audience, or people that might be objecting to this, that it's unfortunately, you have to put it in the macabre way. The Canaanites were, well, to say it bluntly, they were burning their children, their babies, alive, and they would beat the drum so hard and so loud so the parents couldn't hear the cries. Well, anyways, but
Yeah, that's
what?
right.
So yeah, as far as the whole thing of children dying in the process, that was going to happen anyways. With not to make it like a cop out. Well, it was going to happen anyways, you know, like in that sense. But it really was going, because that was their culture, is murdering their children, and in extremely gruesome ways. So their culture was so sadistic and savage and insane. I mean, there I think there's a difference that people have a hard time discerning between, like, they'll read something in the book and they'll come away from different perspectives to say, oh, that horrible, or they can say, well, I could see this person, you know, and I have sympathy for this person, or that horrible person, or this or that. But there is a difference where it comes down to experience. For instance, like what's going on in Russia right now. Now, say, like, just go way into the future, and maybe if books are written about what happened in Russia at this time right now, once, you know, war's over or whatever, people will look back at it with them, they'll read about it, and they'll say, oh my goodness, like, that was horrible, but I could see this perspective, and I come from this perspective way with it, and should have, maybe that was too harsh, or this, or what should they have done with that leader who was enacting this, or what should they have done with the people? And, you know, people could scramble of that later on in the future when they read the history and books. But there's a difference between experience and what people will come away with when they're actually in the midst. Like, for instance, the Russian people that are in the midst of the war, or the Ukrainian people more specifically that are in the midst of the war, and how they feel and what they see, and what, you know, what they're calling out for justice to happen to this person who is enacting all this to happen out of their own selfishness. So it would be a different thing, like, to travel back in time and to see it from, like, how the Jewish people may have seen it, that they were like, yeah, no, God is all just in telling us that we need to take these people out, kind of thing. So the difference from you can read it in a book, but for it to actually be happening to us, because I want to say, if we were immersed in Russia right now, I think we would have all one word saying justice is done if this guy's taken out or whatever, to prevent all the other damage. So people can squabble back and forth of what God should and shouldn't have done, or what the Israelites should or shouldn't have done. But if they were there to experience it, that would be the reality, even more so than just reading it and coming away with, oh, well, I think this should have happened, or I think that shouldn't have happened. Yeah, well, what about when you're actually immersed in it? Then that may change your perspective.
If you think about, so let's wrap it up, and I'll just let everybody a last word here. But I wanted to, yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the things like that in the text, you could take it as a, you know, kind of like the criteria of embarrassment in a way. If you wanted to, you could, it's like, it's not sugar coated. You can bring your baggage to it, whatever it is. And, you know, there's not endless details about, you know, to justify it, just like the Bible doesn't seem necessary to justify the existence of God. It just presumes it, right? And I don't think you can, I'd kind of look at it like, you can't really make this stuff up. Like, fiction doesn't look like that. Like, if they wanted to make a fake book, it would look so much more, you know, tidy in certain ways, or outlandish and ridiculous in other ways. People will make that case that it is, but I would argue that when you look at books where people were trying to embellish, make stuff up, especially back then, it just seems like the Bible isn't that. And so you could look at it that way. I think we don't know all the details, but we can distinguish God's character from Scripture. And I always used to tell atheists about the genocidal things. I was just like, all you have to, like, logically speaking, You just have to come up with a reason why it's a better decision to do that. And I can think of a million reasons why taking out a whole people group under certain circumstances would make sense, hypothetically. It doesn't make it, just depends on what you bring to the table and what your assumptions are, what your baggage is. So thank you guys for coming. This was very fun. I'd love to do this every week whenever you guys are available. And I'll get a hold of you, Rebecca, about talking about that if you want. I do have some stuff to prepare, some text or whatever I have in mind, because I've been studying it a little bit. I have some videos on it called like the threefold division of the law, and then 2 with Torah scrolls on the front, where I read some papers from different perspectives and just gave some commentary on it. But yeah, let's do that. But any comments you guys each want to make, go ahead. Thanks for coming again. Love you guys.
Cool. Yeah, this was an awesome stream. Loved it so much. Thanks for everything you guys said. It was wonderful. And yeah, appreciate it. Good night.
Go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you for having me on. I do appreciate it. To have more conversations like this in the future, of course. I was supposed to be doing my own open mic tonight, and the fact that I didn't do it is the only reason I was able to come on. So in the future, I might not be able to come on.
It's never too late. It's only 9. If you want to plug your channel, go ahead.
Sure. I run the YouTube channel, The Synagogue, to the CYNICOGUE. I do Christian apologetics there from a Reformed fundamentalist perspective. So if anybody's interested in that, definitely consider checking it out. And thanks for allowing me to plug.
Yeah, I'll have the guests' channels in the description. So definitely check out everybody's channel, because they're my favorite channels. If you go to my channel, you'll see that they're both on my recommended channel list.
Oh, thank you. I have to look and make sure you're on mine. I don't know. I have to check. I'll do that right now.
Okay, so I guess I'll go last.
Yeah, you're up, buddy. Yeah, don't feel like you have to put me on your channel if you don't worry about it. But
oh, I want you on my channel.
Okay. So 2 more analogies. Also take 2 more. With regarding the Canaanite nation, if you can look at it in the sense of like how cancer cells spread. Obviously, I'm just using layman's terms or whatever, but they were really like a cancerous nation that was just taking over in the Middle East and whatnot. And if in the sense that you look at the earth as a body, and you see this Canaanite nation as like a cancerous nation that was taking over and being destructive to other nations, obviously to themselves, and ultimately they were utterly trying to destroy the Israelite nation. And if God were to allow them to do so, then what would happen to the leading up to the gospel and the lineage of Jesus and so on, King David, and all the history that we see all the New Testament. So if somebody needs, as they need to, why is this leaving my mind? As you got to go in, like if you have cancer and you need to go in for chemotherapy, it's the same thing. If God needed to do a sense of chemotherapy on this nation to kill it off, because it was going to destroy the earth and destroy his specific people, the Jewish nation, the people that was supposed to chose him and stuff, and also for the sake of other people who were to be converted into be adopted into the Jewish family, then yes, so be it. Absolutely. Now I'll end with this. You have a veiling, you have a mother and her daughter, or yeah, leave it at that. Like I'm a mother, if you want to take it either from a mother and daughter perspective, or a king and his daughter who's a princess. So both ways, if you look at it, put that together. And somebody's watching this, and all of a suddenly they see that there are some boys that want this princess, but the princess, kind of getting into trouble. She's rejecting, they're falling in the same thing. The mother sees her daughter, and he's getting into trouble with these guys that keep going after. I see you. I see your face. And this happens over and over again until finally, like, it keeps either getting this daughter into so much trouble, and these guys won't leave this princess alone, and the king starts saying, hey boys, you got to stay off, she doesn't want you, or the mother will say, hey boys, get away. But when it comes down to the point where it becomes dangerous, so for instance, these bad boys, they're after this mother's daughter, they actually really start getting aggressive, and then as soon as they get the picture that this girl's not going to give way, they go into getting violent with her, and they want to, dare I say, they want to try to gang rape her and whatnot. And then they have a plan to murder her. And a natural mother is going to defend her daughter. And if she has to, in turn, defend her daughter by essentially, yes, killing those boys. And likewise, the king, if he has to defend his princess, his daughter, if it gets to the point that somebody is trying to assassinate or take the princess for ransom just to get money, and he's they're eventually they're going to murder the princess, then the king has to do that solemn, somber thing to protect his daughter. Now, when that person who's overviewing these two scenes right now sees the veil come down, and by the way, this princess name is Ariel, and this daughter to the mother's name is also Ariel, and they have the veil comes down and it comes loose, and you see what it really is. You see that the daughter and the princess is Israel, or Ariel, as the Bible does say in a certain part in Isaiah. And you see who the king and the mother is. It's God Almighty trying to protect his daughter and his princess. And God has to do, he is literally, in a sense, forced by his good nature, his loving nature, to protect his daughter and his princess. That these bad boys, the veil comes off, these bad boys that are bandits or whatever, these people that are trying to kidnap the princess, these bad boys that were trying to gang rape the daughter. I don't want to use such macabre, violent language, but perhaps it's necessary for this analogy. So that mother, that it turns out to be this Canaanite nation that's trying to wipe out the Israelites. I think your audience should understand the point I'm getting at. But God had to react to this, and he had to do this actually loving act out of his love, which just coincide with his justice, that his justice fits in with his love. He had to protect and defend his daughter and his princess. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good one. All right. This has been a Jamie Russell production. Thank you for coming.